And per usual, I will start with the roll. So I'll call two rolls. The first will be committee members and alternates of committee members. And the second roll will be ACUS members not on the committee, as well as alternates. So first roll, Connor Rosso, committee chair.
Here.
Catherine Allen.
Here.
Jill Laptosky, alternate for Dan Cohen.
Here.
Erica Hoff.
Here.
Christina Tackett, alternate for Ami Grace Tardy. Alice Kottmeyer.
Here.
Erica Litzen.
Here.
Mike Livermore. Charlie Maresca.
This is Dave Rosker. Alternate for Charlie Maresca.
Okay, Charlie's not here.
No, he's here. I'm here.
Oh, so Dave, you're not an alternate for Charlie Maresca for this meeting?
Sorry, I didn't see Charlie on the participants list. Sorry.
Okay, Carol Junn, alternate for Christina McDonald.
I'm here.
Jonathan Rose. Jeff Rosen.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. Ryan Rossner, alternate for Jay Schwartz.
Here. Thanks.
Sid Shapiro. Peter Strauss.
Here.
Jonathan Weiner. Chin Yu.
Here.
Roy Sherlock, who will be Chin Yu's alternate for part of the meeting.
Here.
Marion Zobler.
I'm here.
Okay, is there anyone on the committee on regulation whose name I did not call? Okay, now in that case, I will go to the second roll. So people on this list are ACUS members not on the committee. And so if your name is called on this list, it means you will not be able to vote in this meeting. Carrie Colonisi, project consultant.
Here.
Nick Perillo.
Here.
Leslie Cooper Vegan.
Here, alternate for Susan Davies of Department of Justice.
Thank you. Ron Levin.
Here.
Are there any ACUS members whose names I have not called?
I think I missed mine. Mike Livermore, I'm here.
Mike Livermore, excellent, thanks.
John Duffy is here too.
Great. Any other ACUS members?
Sid Shapiro.
Thanks, Sid, we got you. All right, well, I think that's it. So Connor, I think now we'll just turn to Matt for any opening remarks.
Welcome, everyone. I have no opening remarks, and I'm happy to turn the meeting back over to Connor. Connor?
Thank you. I will just briefly go over the ground rules for discussion that you probably know so well. So only the ACUS members, those who are on the committee or not, and their designated alternates have full speaking privileges. Anyone else who wants to speak can do so with unanimous consent of the committee. Please, everybody, keep your microphone on mute, and please try to use Zoom's hand raising feature if you'd like to speak. It'll be too hard to see folks in the little boxes, and I will do my best with Todd's help to keep the queue, and I will call on you. ACUS members and alternates, please use the webcam so we can get some visual feedback as well. So with respect to the non-ACUS members, participation is allowed with unanimous consent of the committee. And so I'll call on folks at appropriate points, and we'll presume that unanimous consent for allowing non-members to speak is granted absent anyone objecting. And so please use the the Zoom hand raising feature, and I will call on folks, time permitting as well, who are not ICUS members. One key thing, please don't engage in substantive sidebar discussions in the chat. If that does happen at the right time, I'll read it to the group, but we want to just have one discussion rather than two discussions going off in different directions. And we will probably be voting today, only members of the Committee on Regulation. And so that can be the government members or their alternates, the public members, senior fellows, liaison members, special counsels. Only those folks who are on the committee will vote. Please don't vote unless you're a member of the committee. And Todd and I have a list of the committee members in case you're unsure, and we will do our best to tally the votes. Okay, so with those preliminaries out of the way, we will go right into it and start.
Connor, one more announcement. We do have a hard stop at 12:50 today.
Okay, yes, there's another ACUS event, which maybe somebody can mention at the end. Thank you for that. And so we'll go right into the recommendation. Thank you to Todd and all the ACUS staff for a lot of work in drafting this. We went through many drafts, and so we welcome your feedback. Tried to take the committee's discussions from last meeting to heart. I think it makes sense to start with the recommendations since that's where we left off. We'll just work on the clean version that Todd circulated. He also sent around a red line showing the changes from the last draft. And then we will, after that, go to the preamble. So with that, I will open up discussion for all of number 1, which is what you see on Todd's screen. May go down a little, Todd, if you can zoom out just a little bit if it's not too small. I'll open comments for number 1. And I see Ron Levin.
Thank you, Connor. I want to draw attention to paragraph 1A, which currently says defining what the agency considers to be inoperative guidance documents with consideration of categories such as something like half a dozen categories. And I don't think it's good drafting to frame it in terms of a definition of what an inoperative guidance document is. The second paragraph of the preamble has a very concise definition. I think it should be common language among all participants that is the definition. Rather, I think this paragraph should be framed in terms of defining the scope of the policy that it will adopt. So the language I would propose is defining the scope of its policy on inoperative guidance documents after considering potential categories such as.
That seems sensible to me, but I welcome reactions on that specific point. Any objections to that edit? Okay. Hearing none. Other comments on anything in number 1, lines 55 through 79? I know we spent a lot of time on this part of it, so I'll leave it open for a moment. Other reactions? Peter Strauss. Okay, Peter Strauss has some amendments. Okay, Peter, I don't know what time.
No, those are for later. I just may
Okay.
have to leave early, and I wanted you to have them in case.
Appreciate it. Well, I think we'll have a good shot at getting. I don't know what time you have to leave, but I think you can raise them, and if not, we'll consider them.
Right.
Any other comments on number 1?
We have Alice Kottmeyer.
Thank you.
Has her hand up.
Thank you.
Right, I just had a question about H, indicating whether any or all of the procedures should be applied retroactively. Which procedures? Okay, we're talking about the procedures in the preamble, correct?
It's the procedures
The
referred to.
chapeau, I mean.
Procedures referred to at lines 55 through 57.
Okay. Okay, all right, that's my question. I have nothing further.
Okay, hearing no further comments on number one, then we'll move on to number two, which is sort of the scoping part of the recommendation. Todd has included a note for the committee, so I know, Peter, you have something, but I'll let Todd just introduce his question. And this one, it might helpful to zoom in a little, Todd, just so the font is bigger.
Sure.
Maybe that's just my need for glasses.
No, it's definitely small. So the question here for the committee, I think it's self-explanatory, but so this paragraph, all of number two, is, think of it as an elaboration of a part of number one. So as you can see in 1C, it says, as part of agencies' policies, they should identify which kinds of inoperative guidance documents are to be made publicly available. And that refers to paragraph 2. So then we come down to paragraph 2, and this gives agencies further guidance on how to make the determination of what kinds of guidance documents, of what kinds of inoperative guidance documents they should make publicly available. What we want to make sure of is that we're making clear in this paragraph that we're not telling agencies that they should evaluate individual inoperative guidance documents against these criteria, although they certainly can do that. That might not be a bad practice. But the purpose of this is it's a policy recommendations to give agencies factors to use to decide which categories of inoperative guidance documents to make available. We just want to make sure that the wording of this captures that intention.
Peter, I know you have a comment, but any comments on that, on Todd's initial issue? And then we'll move to your comment, Peter. Okay, seems like folks are generally fine with the wording and the reference. Peter Strauss.
So this and other suggestions that I'll be making all reflect a perspective that I offered last time and haven't, maybe through misreading, haven't found reflected in the new draft, which is that we ought to be encouraging attention to back and forth, as it were. That is, granted, 2019-3 is there, but this stands on its own. It's going to be read. And so I think it's useful to make some reference to the content of replacement documents. And so here, I don't know whether it would be added as a separate alphabetical designation or whatever, but I think there ought to be language such as, whether now operative guidance effectively serves as an amendment of the guidance that is now inoperative.
Let me just make sure I got that. Peter, did you put that in the chat as well?
I put that in the chat to you, I think.
Yeah, so whether currently operative guidance effectively serves as a replacement for or amendment of the guidance that is now inoperative. So maybe as 2H or?
Fine, up to the committee on style and placement and all the rest of that. I would make it 2A, but that's my take.
My only concern with that, Eric, I'll call on you, is that we're just sort of singling out one of the categories in recommendation 2, but not all of them. So just logic, I understand it's an important one, but it just strikes me as a little bit strange to only single out one of the categories, but I'll see what other folks think.
Well, I like all the others. I'm not objecting to any of the others.
Got it. Erica.
I think this is related to Peter's question or Peter's suggestion. What the very end of your language is of the guidance that is now inoperative. What do we think about situations where a new guidance document effectively serves as an amendment for another guidance document that is otherwise operative? In other words, is this not, should that not also be somehow captured by this policy and by this concept of inoperativeness? Or is that subsumed in what Peter was suggesting?
I thought it was covered at lines 58 through, you can see what you think yourself, Erica. I consider it covered in 1A.
Okay.
But I don't know.
Okay, the
whether
partially
it's-
rescind, oh, okay, that's fine. All right.
If there's ways to bolster the wording.
I
or
agree.
it looks- Okay. I don't know. What else, other reactions on Peter Strauss's amendment at 82 to 83? Additional thoughts on number 2 as it reads on the screen. I see a number of thoughts. Professor Kerry Coglianese.
Just on Peter's point, I'm wondering if the provision you just referred to in 1 addresses it, and whether this fits with the preceding lines in 2, lines 80 and 81, in deciding which kinds of operative guidance documents to post online. How does whether currently operative guidance effectively serve as a replacement for, how does that factor into figuring out which kinds of inoperative guidance documents? And maybe it's clear to everybody else, but the connection between that factor and the kinds of inoperative guidance documents would be helpful. Maybe if Peter could just clarify that for me at least.
Well, the subsequent suggestions that I'm going to make pretty much all relate to what you may think is already dealt with in 3/2019, which is just fine. But again, as I said, I'm hopeful of making this a stand on its own document for agencies so that they see, as it were, the integration. And the subsequent suggestions that I'm going to make all have to do with emphasizing the link between the successor guidance and the previous guidance, whether it's partially rescinded or wholly rescinded or whatever.
I guess I'm wondering if again, Connor's response to Erica already addresses that sufficiently.
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I mean, from my perspective, the most important thing that is involved in this recommendation, which on the whole is just fine, but the most important thing is establishing the relationship between the guidance that is now present and the guidance that has been partially or wholly replaced. And this recommendation doesn't really focus on that. And those are the suggestions that I am intending to make. It may be implicit in the language.
Right.
I don't want to argue with you that you couldn't make it out.
No, I'm just really trying. I'm wondering if we want to put it in everyone. I mean, an alternative could be to make a separate standalone if it's a the important point. And listen, I certainly am sympathetic to making the connection between 2019-3 and this one. So an alternative could be to make it a separate standalone point, maybe between paragraphs 1 and 2, that could emphasize this point even more strongly, that in carrying out all of these recommendations, the agency should consider how its current operative guidance interrelate to the inoperative ones, if I understand the concern correctly.
Consider and indicate. Right? The point is to put it out there in link form or in some other form so that people can go back and forth. And that's what's not there. And if the Committee on Style thinks that, oh, okay, this really deserves independent consideration on its own, that's fine. I've got, I think, 3-4 suggestions that will accomplish it within the framework that the drafters of this thing suggested, and be reasonably clear. Again, I'll say from my perspective, I'd rather this one be 2A than 2G, but that's a different matter.
Ron Levin, did you have a point on this specific issue?
No, I wanted to go back to the comment bubble.
Oh,
So
okay.
recognize me when that's right. After you finish this one.
I'll circle back. Thank you. Jen, same question. Do you have a comment on this issue or something else?
I'm like Ron. I want to
Okay.
go.
I'll get back to you guys shortly. John Duffy, I think you might be on this issue because you just raised your hand.
Yeah, it is. It is on this issue. I kind of agree with Carrie. It doesn't seem, I take Peter's point as a valid one. But it doesn't seem to fit in this category. All the other factors, it seemed pretty obvious to me how they cut in terms of whether the agency is going to post the inoperative guidance. This one seems different. And the point that Peter just explained doesn't really, seems very distinct and maybe deserving of its own paragraph, but it's very hard for me to get that out of this factor.
That is my sense. Nick Perillo.
This is directly on point. I'm not sure about the style and organization question. Maybe that is best left to the consultants or the committee on style. But I do agree with Peter that it would be appropriate to have more emphasis somehow or other on, as he said, the connections between the documents over time. Given that that kind of principled yet flexible evolution is a theme in our prior recommendations on interpretive rules and policy statements, 2017-5 and 2019-1.
Thank you. Carrie, do you have another point on this issue? I see your hand is still up.
Sorry, no, I just forgot to put it down. Sorry.
No worries. Other points on this issue? Paul Noe.
So I need unanimous consent to speak, Connor?
I'll presume it absent an objection, which I don't hear.
Okay. First, Peter, since I got to worry a lot about heavily regulated industries, what they deal with, I totally applaud your point that clarifying the relationship between the current operative guidance and previous guidance would be extremely helpful. And I don't know whether you have in mind at some point the idea that's in the CFR, right? There's notes to sections that talk about amended at such and such a place. That would be so helpful.
Exactly. So, and as I said last time we met, it's also in the USC.
Yes.
And that ought to be here.
Yes.
And that kind of thing is what I'm going to be lobbying for throughout this meeting.
Thank you. And another, it's a related point I wanted to make. I talked about the due process and fair notice principles about, and this relates, Peter, to the interrelationship between a currently operative guidance and its predecessor. I think one of the factors that's not in this list but should be is whether the inoperative guidance document presents an historical fact, a plausible way of interpreting a related rule, as long as it doesn't conflict with any guidance document that is in effect. I think that should be a factor to consider too, because there are lots of cases, right? I mean, if it's a matter of the agency, its interpretation in the past was X and now it's saying not X. I'm not talking about that. I'm saying when its interpretation in the past was X and now it's saying Y, but the two do not conflict, in X, which possibly has been relied on by the regulated community for a very, very long time, is still valuable as an historical fact because it's one plausible way to understand the regulations. And I think that's consistent with the fair notice case law, including Supreme Court case law.
Oh, do you mind if we hold that issue till we resolve Peter's issue? But
Okay.
in the meantime, take a look at item D, 2D on reliance interests and think about.
Yeah, I think
Oh.
this is a more specific expression.
Okay, well, we can come,
Yeah.
I just wanted, I want to
Okay,
resolve the
sorry.
Strauss point first.
Okay.
Ron, you were in the queue for something else. My question, Peter, would you be amenable to the Committee on Style drafting a new standalone recommendation, sort of addressing this point that you've raised, as Carrie suggested, and seeing how it looks after that?
Absolutely, and especially, particularly, maybe only if it was way up front.
So Matt, Reeve, Todd, does this leave things too ambiguous in your view to come back with this, or what's your sense of, should we try to draft something now?
Reeve?
Todd, I'll largely have to defer to you. I think that this is adequate to get the concept down, and we can take a shot at drafting something and maybe run it by Peter as well. But yeah, no, I think we've got the key pieces we need. Todd, do you agree?
Yeah, I think so.
It's sort of a balancing between getting through the recommendation, but also not leaving things. Okay, we'll take a crack at this. If anyone else wants to see it, let us know. If anyone has ideas on the wording, Peter, if you want to send some wording, that's always welcome. Nick Perillo, if you want to send some wording, no pressure, that's welcome. Okay, Ron Levin, you've been waiting patiently.
Yeah, I will just add one thing to the item we're just finishing here. If indeed a separate section is drafted, this comment will be moot, but if it stays in the list, I appreciate Peter's idea that he doesn't want it buried at the very end. On the other hand, I'm not so sure it should be at the very front. I think the two items immediately following it are the most central and general, the ones currently B and C. So I would make Peter's passage third if it stays in the list.
Thank you. We'll make a note on that. And, yeah.
Now I'll give it the point I was going to get to. Addresses the comment bubble query, which nobody had a big problem with. I don't have a big problem with it either, but you might clarify it a little bit if you go to line 84. No, it's now 80. And make it say, in deciding which kinds of inoperative guidance documents should be reviewed for possible posting on its website. You're now saying very explicitly, we are not calling for case-by-case application of all the factors.
I like that. I think that might help address some concerns over agency resources, but I welcome other, I think I had offline something along those lines, but other reactions on that specific point. Objections.
Carrie, if I can just highlight maybe the connection with number one above may be changed a little bit then, because as I understood it, in the intent with two was to articulate considerations that should go into establishing procedures. And so maybe either 60 on line 67, which kind of should be reviewed for line 68, I guess, which guidance should be reviewed for consideration for possible, public availability on its website.
That's a good catch. Reactions on that conforming amendment, conforming change.
Or actually potential probably fits the context.
Okay, potential, right.
Okay, hearing no further points, Chin.
Yeah, so going back to the comment bubble, I was a little uncomfortable with whether this is clear enough about that we're not suggesting agencies review individual documents. And I'm not exactly sure how we do that. Maybe these edits help. And initially I was going to suggest that we change kinds to categories, but then I think we're now using categories in section 1 to refer to rescinded documents, partially rescinded documents, etc. So it seems like we've got 2 different groupings of types of documents that we want agencies to look at here, which is probably fine, but I just think well, I'm just wondering if there's some way of making this more clear.
And the clarity being that these are sort of groups of documents, not every individual document. Is that that's the point that needs to be clear?
Yeah. Maybe what we should say is something like, and I'm just putting my thoughts out there, in deciding, which kinds of documents should be made available in addition to the analysis in section 1C. Agencies should also consider, something like that. I don't have the prior page in front of me right now with our edits, but there's 2 separate, so there's 2 different types of analyses we're asking agencies to do. And I think we should just be coherent about that.
Make the cross-reference more explicit.
Connor, can I add
Yes,
to that?
please.
Carrie. I think one of the things that trips me up with this, whether the intent is clear, is that in each of the subsections, the language says the inoperative guidance document, or it suggests that that kind of language seems to suggest some kind of individualized review of each guidance document. So that is a different kind of analysis than what I think is being suggested in 1, which, and was, I think, intended in 2, is to come up with categories or kinds of inoperative guidance documents that should be considered for public availability on the websites. And so when we get to those subparts and we say whether the inoperative guidance document, it makes it sound like that's a review on the specific document, whereas I think the intent here is to focus on the kinds or categories of inoperative guidance documents. I don't know whether it would be helpful to say, instead of referring to the document, refer to whether the type of document or kind of document. Would that help throughout that section to make it clear that it's more of a defining of categories than of determining whether an individual document qualifies for posting?
I think that's helpful. Perhaps when we redraft, we could even include type of document, kind of document in the introductory clause at line 83, if the drafting works parallel, but I don't know. I think that's helpful, but Chin, what's your sense?
Yes, thank you, Carrie. You stated the issue much better than I did.
Reactions on that point? Ron Levin.
I don't think it's not exactly on that point, but I wanted to speak to the insertion that was made on line 82. I think that doesn't exactly work because 1C is simply a cross-reference back to this paragraph. I think what Chin means is paragraph 1. And I think conceptually that is not incorrect, but the whole point of paragraph 1 is to define the scope of the policy statement they're going to adopt So I think it really is not necessary. Because in addition to as a qualifier, and the scope determination is a qualifier to the entire document, and I don't think we need to keep saying it here or elsewhere.
Jen, if we included the sort of category kind of throughout, either in the, one way or another, would you be okay with removing the reference back up to recommendation 1?
Yeah, actually what I was trying to get at was 1A. If we could just scroll back up there. So there we have a list of potential categories. And I think what I just wanted to try to make clear was in 1A, we're looking at groups of documents, rescinded, partially rescinded, et cetera. And then if you go back down to part 2, we have a different set of groupings that agencies should also look at. So, I mean, I would defer to the committee, as to whether we think that needs additional clarification, but, I think we're asking agencies to go through both analyses, and both analyses involve putting things in groups.
Sure. Yeah, I think I sort of view 1A as like step 1, which is sort of what is an inoperative document, and then 2 is sort of like, oh, which should you put on the website? So it's sort of like analysis 1 and 2. But Catherine Allen.
Hi, sorry, I've just gotten a little confused kind of with these edits now. I mean, I guess is the point of 2 is that we would anticipate an agency would say something like, on its website would say, we are going to publish all inoperative guidance documents that generated reliance interests when they were operative, and then individual documents would then be reviewed by the agency to determine if they fit within that category. Is that what we're trying to get at? Just the way it's written now, I find I find fairly confusing.
I think the idea is to provide guidance on how to implement the policy in recommendation 1, but I see Carrie.
Yeah, I do think that we do need to try to clear this up. And I'm not sure, even though I made the suggestion of putting kind of throughout, that's adequate. To go back to Chin's point about 1, A, having now the word categories, and 2, also dealing with categories. I mean, one possibility there could be to rephrase, maybe to convey the same point that Ron was making earlier, but without invoking categories, to say something like, defining what it considered, to go back to more of the original wording, what it considers to be an inoperative guidance document for the purpose of the agency's procedures, addressing the points that are in paragraphs, the rest of the recommendation. I mean, maybe that would eliminate invoking sort of one set of categories there, confusing the reader with additional categories down below. As to Catherine's point, I mean, I think there is a nesting here. First, defining what is an inoperative guidance for purposes of the agency's procedures on public availability of inoperative guidance. That's 1. 2 would be then to determine among the category of inoperative guidance documents, which ones are, let's just say important enough to be posted online, kept online. Maybe that's all of them, but maybe it's some subgroup, like just the ones that have reliance interest. If it's some subgroup, then yes, there will be a 3rd level down, which I don't think is necessary to specify, and I don't think the recommendation as drafted does specify, but obviously there would be an individual by individual document determination of whether it qualifies as the type of inoperative guidance that would go onto the website, which is what 2, I think, is aiming to articulate.
That's how I understood it as well. Go ahead, Catherine.
Sorry, so is the idea just that in 2, we're telling the agency that it needs to establish procedures that list these various categories, whether it be all inoperative or a category that maps onto one of these factors that we're talking about.
Right, one or more of those factors, exactly. And I think what the comment bubble that Todd put in here was the way this is written right now, with, again, reference to the inoperative guidance document. It almost makes it sound like it is that third level down of evaluating a specific individual document, rather than, as you've just articulated correctly, the intent here is, what are the categories of inoperative guidance documents that will go online? If it's not to be all of them, if it's to be some subset, what are the subsets and how do you define those subsets?
Catherine, any responses? Jen, did you have any more on this point?
No.
Okay. Peter Strauss.
So I wonder if that last point, which sounds right to me, couldn't be taken care of by just taking out the definite article "the" wherever it appears in 2. Replacement for or amendment of guidance that is now inoperative. Operative version of inoperative guidance document, so forth, or documents. Just don't make it sound
remove
like
the
you're talking
article
about a
and make
singular.
it plural.
Hmm?
Make the guidance document plural. I think that could do it.
Right.
Are folks comfortable with, in principle, with this idea, and then the Committee on Style can draft it up? Ron Lovett.
Yes. First there was an edit on paragraph 1A, and as I said before, I don't think the word defining should be there. It should be determining and written in some fashion. Well, let's speak to this particular. Let's stick with 2 for the moment. As I look at this, it seems to me that some of the determinations couldn't be done categorically. Particularly the reliance point. I think some documents generate reliance and others don't generate reliance. And so maybe what you want is something in the introductory language of 2 that says that the agency might make the kind of determinations the paragraph is considering, either on a categorical basis or leave it for case-by-case determination. I don't have language to do that. I think the Committee on Style could frame it, but I think probably we're trying to do too much by saying that everything in the list should be done categorically, even though the intent behind the comment bubble was that sometimes it would be feasible and sufficiently precise to do it categorically.
Harry, Todd, do you have a reaction on that?
I think that's right. I guess even though obviously it would always have to be a case by case or document by document determination of whether a document created some reliance interest. The question would be, is that a criterion that the agency would want to identify in its procedures as an appropriate one for the agency to use in making those document by document determinations? I mean, maybe rather than thinking about these as categories, they would be better as thought of as factors or criteria for the agency to adopt in its policy as the kinds of or the criteria kinds of documents that would be covered by it. Then that would be posted online.
Reactions on that point?
So Carrie, on your last point, how would you, where would you change the wording of 2 or 1 to address that?
maybe we should say something in two, rather like in identifying, in identifying the scope of inoperative guidance documents to be made publicly available online, the agency should consider including one or more of the following criteria in its procedures.
Would you then keep the language about either on a categorical or document by document basis, or would that come out?
I don't see how there's any way you can get around needing to make a document by document determination, right? You'll have a document, and unless the agency specifies a criteria that all inoperative guidance documents will be posted online, is the minute it starts subsetting, then there's going to have to always be a document by document determination of whether it fits into the subset that should be remaining online. So
There may be some cases where big bunches of agency guidance are highly similar. And so I don't know. I think there may be cases where categorical determination may make more sense. But I'd like to hear from other agency folks. Ron Levin.
I guess others people should, I mean, I've had a lot of things to say here, but it seems to me that probably you could shorten one considerably by just saying in deciding what interpretive guidance documents, et cetera, if you're going to have the idea of categories versus non-categories elsewhere, you could, two. You could just say in determining which inoperative guidance documents should be reviewed for posting, because you're going to put the idea of categories versus solely case by case somewhere else. So you can shorten it considerably, I think.
Ryan Rosner. I think you're still muted, Ryan.
Sorry about that. I mean, there are many competing edits right now, but I just wanted to echo, I think, the point that Chin was making that, just from an implementation standpoint, I think if the purpose of this document is to inform agencies about considerations for how to make decisions in a kind of principled and systemic way, it might be easier to focus on kinds and categorical determinations, even if, I think the point that Ron and Carrie were making that, ultimately at the decision to publish, there will be some individualized determination. If we're aiming at informing procedures, I think we kind of want to define what the categories would look like first, so that we kind of have set up some principles for how this will run, rather than establishing principles for each kind of individualized decision, which maybe invites more of the individualized determination, which I sense the committee is trying to take a step to kind of add some principles around. I think that's consistent with the comment. So, I mean, to the point of whether the final sentence about leaving it for document by document, I mean, it might be appropriate to leave that, but I think focusing this paragraph in the way that I think Chin's earlier comment, trying to focus it on categories of documents, I think is probably the most useful way to have to read, just so that it kind of sets up some clear principles.
Reactions on this comment and the broader point. Yes, Chin.
I prefer the edit. I like the document better now with the edits in it. And I think part of that is, I mean, obviously someone has to look at every document, but I think, if you're looking at agency implementation, some of these factors are a lot easier to implement categorically than others. So for example, if you're just trying to figure out if the operative version of the inoperative guidance was previously posted online. It's very straightforward for someone to do that. And that could really be pushed down to a fairly low staff level. Whereas if you're looking at something like, whether the guidance document generated reliance interest, that's something you might want to consult with counsel on. So even though, bottom line, at some point, someone has to look at the document, I think, saying you can make the determination on a categorical basis or leave it for a document by document determination gives agencies some flexibility on how to make these determinations. And I would find that to be helpful.
Sid Shapiro.
I may have lost the thread here, but perhaps we've trying to make perfection the enemy of the good. I thought the point here was that an agency may want to establish criteria to guide it in deciding which documents to publish or not. And what we're saying is among the criteria the agency might want to establish or consider establishing are the following. That formulation avoids the debate over categorical or individuality and focuses in on the recommendation that you have a set of criteria that'll make it easier case by case to determine what to put up and what not to put up.
And did you have a further point on this issue?
On further reflection, I think Sid and Chin's point is good, that last sentence is serving a useful role there. But again, focusing on leaving agencies the ability to set up categorical procedures internally would be helpful.
So I'm going to suggest something here rather than trying to implement or trying to redraft this, because I think there are just a lot of different ideas and the redrafting is getting confusing. It's becoming clear to me that we're going to be starting from scratch on this one. So I'm just going to put in a comment bubble the core ideas that were raised, and then we'll leave the redrafting for later because I don't think we're going to redraft it during this meeting. So that would be my suggestion, Connor, if that's okay with you.
Nope, that's my inclination. I just wanted to make sure we got everybody's views out there. So I'll make one last call for additional thoughts on this issue, and then Todd keys that up. Mary Ann Zobler.
Hi, thank you. I just want to make sure when you look about the redrafting that the categories that are listed, the criteria, I guess A through F, we have. The first point is the agency should pick from among these categories that they want to use. And then the question becomes implementation. That's the way I've been reading this. I just want to make sure I didn't lose that in all of that discussion. Because an agency could say, we don't want to look at criterion B. We're only going to do A and D. And then how we implement that is going to be up to us. It could be case by case or categorically.
That's my understanding.
Okay, so just that would be helpful to be clear if that's the intent.
Carrie, yeah, and I think Todd's comment bubble was sort of teeing that issue up, but go ahead, Carrie.
No, I mean, I have the same sense as Marion that this is what is intended here. What I want to make sure I have clear, at least in my own mind, if we go back and redraft something for the committee to consider, is this difference between categorical versus case by case, and to put it in, I think the kind of language that Marion was suggesting, these are just different ways of implementing the procedure that the agency would adopt with some or all of these criteria listed as the agency chooses. Categorical, if I am understanding, would mean implemented on a routine basis by even clerical staff, and case by case, is that substituting here for being implemented with some kind of higher level review, perhaps by the general counsel or something like that? I mean, that obviously how this policy or procedures get implemented could be highly variable across different agencies. So I do want to be mindful of what is meant by categorical versus case by case, if that's something that we think is important to keep in there.
Ron Levin.
I think this is headed for the Committee on Style no matter what, but just to throw one other idea for its consideration into the mix. Maybe the last sentence of what is now the introductory language of 2 should say, the agency might make some of these determinations on a categorical basis rather than solely on a document by document basis, which would communicate that some of the A through G or whatever might lend themselves to categorical treatment, some not. I'm just trying to give the greatest flexibility to the kind of judgments that Jen was talking about.
I like that language personally. Gary, did you have more on this?
Well, I guess I still don't understand really what the categorical means, because there will be individual documents, and there is someone, whether it's a clerical decision or it's a higher level decision, somebody will have to make sure that this is the kind of document that fits into the category. And that seems to me to be a document specific determination. The question is just the level of judgment or the level of personnel who could make that determination. So if we're trying to capture something about how agencies may want to assign different criteria to different personnel within the organization, maybe we should try to find a way to say that more directly than the categorical versus document specific determinations, because at the end of the day, there's always going to be a document specific determination, won't there be?
It could be made with respect to many documents at once. And so I personally don't think we want to get into agency review process and personnel on it. I think what some agencies might be worried about is folks reading this to say you should individually review all 1,000 of these specific so no action letters that all say the same thing, and make sure you look at them all, as opposed to saying we know these all say the same thing, roughly. But Catherine Allen.
Yeah, just a quick comment. I liked Sid's formulation about how this is about establishing criteria, because at least my understanding of the way that the recommendation is drafted, this is aimed at telling agencies how to establish their procedures. Whereas when we get into some of this stuff, it sounds like we're telling them how to pick which document. And I think this is meant to be saying, this is what you should be looking at in determining your procedure that you put on your website. So I think focusing on that, kind of trying to keep that in mind and focus it on the agency setting its procedures and looking at criteria is an easier way to do that than to get into some of this other stuff.
The procedure. Peter Strauss.
To go back to the point that I've been making, if it happens that the reason this previously operative guidance is now inoperative is that there's new guidance that's being adopted that affects its content in whole or in part, it's at that point that the judgments and notations are going to be made. And I suppose that that is, in an important sense, a categorical, not a document by document determination. But I mean, it's hard to disagree with Carrie's observation that there's always going to be something in front of you when you make this decision.
My suggestion would be that we focus on Todd's comment bubble in the middle of the page. It starts with basic idea, and folks just read that and see if anyone has, let's not get too specific, let's just see if we agree with the broad ideas for direction. So I'm just going to pause for literally 1 minute and let folks just read that, and then I'll reopen discussion on the comment bubble. Carrie, you have your hand up on the comment bubble.
I don't know how many ACUS recommendations really get into specifying ways of implementing recommended procedures. In this case, it seems to me that the first two parts of this middle bubble, the basic idea, agency should establish criteria following Sid's suggestion. And as they establish these criteria, they should consider the following factors. Isn't that enough? And then it's up to the agency to figure out how to implement it. I'm not sure ACUS really needs to get into the categorical versus case by case and then figuring out what all that means. Those are the procedures, and ACUS can trust agencies to figure out how to implement it.
I think that works as long as agencies don't read the language as sort of strongly recommending an individual by individual document. That's my take. But
right, and I think that was Todd's original motivation behind the original comment bubble. So we do have to make sure that it's written in a way that makes that clear. I would say, though, Connor, even to your example about all no action letters, you still have to figure out
on a specific subject.
On a specific subject, you still have to figure out if the if the specific document is a no action letter on that specific subject, right? So it may seem automatic just because it's very clear and specific what the category is, but it will be some individual determination whether it
in many cases, at least in my experience, guidance is sorted on internal systems in a way that can be done with categorizations that have been done previously. So that may be what some folks are thinking of.
Before we move on from this, I just separated out. So if you just look at the first part of the comment now, the one that's highlighted in gray, I just want to make sure that idea, forget about the drafting at this point, that concept is what the committee agrees to. So I'm just going to delete this part of it here. Okay.
And we want this to be conceptually part of number one. This is an agency procedures. This is not implementation, but actually in the procedures, not advice on how to implement the procedures.
So Connor, so then the suggestion is to move this up to number one and not have it here, or
as a readability matter, I like having it separate. I think it deserves a separate section, but I've heard conceptually that a lot of folks want it conceptually to be in number one. So I don't know. I'm not sure if that's how everyone else views it, but that's what I've heard. Ron Levin.
Yeah, I would leave it here because there is a cross-reference in one.
Sure.
And you don't want one to be too lengthy. With regard to the substance of the new comment bubble paragraph, again, we can't keep editing forever, but just to put one other concept into the mix for the ultimate drafters to consider, you might have a phrase that says something like, including broad categories where appropriate.
I like that. Mary Ann Zobler.
Yeah, I thought what might be helpful clarifying is to say once agency establishes or chooses the appropriate criteria, implementation is left to the agency's discretion. So we're talking about a two-step process. Establish the criteria and you pick among the ones that are being offered here. Once you do that, how you will review individual documents is going to be up to an agency to decide. And that makes it very clear that you don't have to go to individual documents for individual documents, you don't have to go back to the ACUS recommendations. You pick it and then you implement it. And to me, with my agency hat on, I think that makes it clear.
Carrie?
That's always implicit in ACUS recommendations. But if the committee thinks that it's important here, another way of making this clear could be just simply in the opening of paragraph 2, saying in establishing the criteria within its procedures for which inoperative guidance documents should be reviewed for posting or should be made available online. Don't even say reviewed. I mean, because that implies there should be some kind of review. But I think in addition to the tie-in that's in number 1 that cross-references to 2, I think the opening of 2 could nail this down by just making clear that these are criteria for the procedure of not getting into implementation at all.
Peter?
So first, I agree with Ron that 1 is currently long enough as it is. And the title of 2, determining which kinds of inoperative guidance documents to publish online, is a helpful subordinate. We seem to be in the business of amending Todd's notes. And I wonder if we aren't in fact better off paying attention to the recommendations and not the notes, and just leaving it to him to do the best he can to get our sense, and then in the next draft that's coming reflect that as best he can. I mean, so once the agencies establish criteria, once you do that, how you review individual documents will be up to you to decide. It's up to the agency to figure out how to implement it. I mean, he's doing this on the fly. There's a lot of repetition. I don't think we should be worrying about it. I think we should be dealing with the draft recommendation.
Additional comments, broadly speaking, on number 2, and then we'll move on to number 3. Okay. So I know we have a lot going on with number 2, but we have had an extensive discussion. Paul, Noe, I know you have a discrete point on reliance interests. And so I guess this is now at lines 99 through 100. So I recognize you for comment on that.
Okay, if you think it would be better, Connor, rather than stating it separately, as a factor to consider whether the inoperative guidance presents one plausible way of interpreting a rule, you could tuck it into D and say where it says whether the inoperative guidance document generated reliance interest when it was operative, or still presents one plausible way of interpreting a related rule. It could go there. But I think it's really important because there are lots of areas where there are mountains of guidance and issues are very, very complex. And when an agency is not going from X to not X, but rather is going from X to Y, yet X still represents, as an historical fact, one plausible way to interpret a regulation, it seems to me that's really important to, very important to keep that guidance document still available to the public.
So are you happy with what's at line 100? Maybe edit say currently presents one plausible way of interpreting the rule.
Yeah, I'm happy with that, Connor. Thank you. There was one other minor point I wanted to make.
Okay. Do you mind if I just open up for just on this edition? I just
Sure.
want to give anyone else a reaction, excuse me, a chance to respond on what's at line 100. Todd, I would just put before presents, I would just put currently or something like that. But any reactions? Ron Levin.
It might be just me, but I don't understand Paul's point really. If presumably the agency thought it was plausible when they issued it initially, so I'm not sure what gets excluded.
Perhaps
There've
something
been-
where events have changed so much that the document is just totally irrelevant to how the rules applied in practice due to technology. That's what I thought, but go ahead, Paul.
Well, I mean, there's been fair notice litigation and case law, right, Ron, over situations where an agency went from X to Y. Y is clearly an interpretation, but it's not the only way to interpret a legally binding regulation, right? And the regulated community maybe has been relying on X for decades, right? And then they get an enforcement action, okay? And what I'm saying is a matter of due process and fair notice. It makes great sense that you would consider heavily towards posting a guidance, even if it's been superseded by Y, that you'd still have that available because it still represents one reasonable interpretation of the regulation. And so I'm
Ron?
thinking of cases like Christopher versus Smith Klein Beecham Corporation, US v. Hoke Celanese. There's a GE case, those kind of cases. That's
Right,
what-
but those were all cases in which the argument was made on the basis of reliance, which is in that provision now. I mean, I think it would all, I mean, I agree with the spirit of your point as to the legitimate interest of a regulated person to have such a document that he can point to and so forth. But it seems to me that adding the new language here would require the agency to go through some kind of debate about whether it's still plausible. And that seems to me something we don't want to bog down the process with getting into. Presumably it was always thought to be plausible, which is why the reliance interests are at stake. If it's one in which there was no reliance.
Wow. I don't think this whole body of case law would be there, Ron, if that were the case. And number two, if it does spur the agency to think, is X still reasonable? That's a good thing, because if they think it's not, they really ought to rescind it clearly and not have it hanging out there with people relying on it for decades and not realizing that they can't do that any longer or suffer enforcement.
Connor, can we go to Erica or Peter now?
I will in a second. I just wanted to give Ron 1 second to think about it. And I do know we need to move on, but go ahead, Erica.
This may relate actually a little bit. I just want to go back, and still on number 2, to an issue I raised last time. And when I raised it last time, the suggestion was to add the reliance interest language, but I'm not sure that it fully responded to what I was concerned about. So agencies that regulate products, FDA for sure, but maybe other products as well, may issue guidance documents that are no longer operative, but are still relevant for some products in the market. And I don't know if it's a sense that I wouldn't call these things grandfathered under the old policy / interpretation, but it's not a reliance interest so much as a document that explains why something in the real world right now does not seem to comply with current agency policy / guidelines. And the answer is because the old expectations, guidance, et cetera, when that was allowed to reach the market, those were different. And so it's not operative anymore, but it is still relevant for understanding how things are in the world today. And I don't think that is yet captured, but that's an important category in my mind for not so much for regulated industry as perhaps for the public to understand why there are things that don't seem to square with what appears to be the agency's policy.
Say, Carrie, Erica, do you have edits?
I
that
don't
you
have
make
language to
okay.
suggest.
If you have language, you can send it
I'll send it.
offline.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Carrie and then Peter.
Yeah, I would just following on Erica, maybe the suggestion to make here would be a bit of a rewrite of what Paul has said here, which is whether continue with whether the inoperative guidance document generated reliance interest when it was operative, or whether it remains relevant for understanding legal obligations. And I like that a little better than plausible way of interpreting a rule for a couple of reasons. I mean, plausibility is, I think, a higher level of determination than relevance. And this could also, and the reason I would say something about legal obligations would be because it could be a guidance that gave insight to or is relevant for understanding the statute, perhaps arguably, as well as a rule.
That's a good point with respect to the statute. Paul, very quickly, what are your thoughts on this edit?
You know, I guess I could say I could live with it. It's better than having nothing.
Peter Strauss.
So no, I think Paul's way of putting it is right, and for a reason that is independent of reliance interests. To the extent that there's anything left of our, or for that matter, Chevron, the fact that the agency had previously presented a whether it's plausible or even better interpretation of its rule, guidance on its rule or its statute, is relevant in the contemporary day to the force that might be given to the replacement guidance. And Paul's way of putting it captures that much better than Carrie's. So I prefer Paul's.
Can I just, I think,
sure.
Can I explain further? I think what I'm suggesting is actually broader than what Paul is explaining. It may be that it's no longer a plausible understanding at all, but that would still make it relevant for understanding the law, right? So I think you narrow this if you are saying only put it online if it's a plausible interpretation. It may be implausible going forward, and that yet still may be relevant for understanding what the law is.
So then how about whether it remains relevant for understanding the documents to which it relates?
Perfectly fine with that.
Paul?
I guess I can live with it.
Ron Levin?
You know, I may just be out of sync with everybody here, but I wouldn't do either of these things because I still think you're putting agency personnel in the position of trashing or at least casting doubt on their own current interpretation, which they're going to hate to do. I think maybe we could get at the idea. So, of course, Paul has an interest in making that case for his clients, but the agency doesn't want to say, here's our new guidance, but of course, we may not be right. That's a really uncomfortable position to ask them to take a stand on.
Ron,
Maybe
how
you
about,
maybe you could get something by saying members of the public consider it plausible. And if so, the agency maybe should put it up there to allow Paul to make his argument.
Ron, what
But I
about my
wouldn't ask the
suggestion?
agency itself to say something about its own former interpretation. You may have a new administration that just hates the positions taken by the earlier regime, or maybe some people in the agency hate it and some are saying, well, that's okay. And they have to debate it with each other, whether it's plausible. I think it's a really uncomfortable position to put them in.
I would just say, no matter where we draft at the next meeting, we'll take a committee vote on this subpart of recommendation 2. So Todd, if you don't mind just marking this as we'll take a vote no matter what next meeting. Ron, I'm sympathetic to your point. My only worry is just that asking the agency to discern or judge what the public considers can be difficult too. It may have a sense, but it's easier to task the agency with making its own determination with its own sense.
I actually wouldn't do either of them, but
I hear you. I hear you. We will take a vote on this. Carrie, quick point, and then after this, we will take a break and move on to number 3. So I want to make sure we have time for the preamble.
Sorry, forgot to lower my hand.
Oh, okay. So the current time is 11:20. So let's come back in 5 minutes, 11:25. We'll move on To the next recommendation, I want to make sure we have time for the preamble because we have a little bit of an early end. So I'll see you in 5 minutes at 11:25.
I think so, yeah.
And Paul, I know you had a minor point. If you don't mind just emailing that to me and Carrie and Todd, we'll work on it in the next draft. We could discuss the next committee if necessary. But let's move on now to number 3, just so we can get through it.
This is Alice. I have one too, and I'll email it to you.
Thank
It's
you.
a minor point.
Appreciate it. I just want to make sure we get to the preamble today. Okay, then moving on to number 3. Peters, is this something on number 2, or which part is this on? You're muted, I think, Peter.
I can't hear Peter. I can see your lips moving, but we can't hear you.
No, this is on 3, and it's a suggestion for the end of the first sentence of 3. Make it easy for the members of the public to find them and relate them to successor guidance.
Reactions on that point?
Friendly amendment could put any in front of.
Yes, any, fine, absolutely.
Reactions? Other reactions on number 3?
Yes. Whoops.
Yes.
Got
Peter
another
Strauss.
one, a new E in successor operative guidance, including links to guidance displaced or amended.
Carrie, Todd, reactions?
I think that's terrific. I would probably just restructure the sentence slightly. All of the other provisions start with a gerund, so I might say including links to
All of this is for the committee on style.
move that to this, the end. But
Ryan? I think you're still muted, Ryan.
Sorry, I just want to make sure I'm understanding the suggestion. So this part is talking about how we make available on our website, or how agencies make available on their website inoperative documents. And then is the intent in E that every time new guidance is issued, it includes links to previous guidance? And is there a sense of, how far back agencies are supposed to go? I'm just trying to understand the sort of scope of what this insertion is adding.
It's related to the language I suggested adding at the beginning of 3 and relate them to successor guidance. It is a way of relating successor guidance, and so it's only about successor guidance.
can I just add, though, Connor, I'm sorry. I was just wanting to add, this may address what you were about to say. Keep in mind that this is in the context of what the agency should consider. So if an agency doesn't think that E is something they want to go forward with, it's not directing them to do that.
Right.
So one practical issue is sometimes one guidance document may have many successors. And so a big web of guidance can emerge. It's not always sort of linear. And so it can get tricky quickly. That's one practical concern I have, but I welcome other thoughts. Ryan, do you still have additional thoughts?
No, I mean, I think I understand the point Carrie's making, that these are suggestions. And I think, to echo Connor's point, sometimes things are not quite so linear. But I understand point of the intended meaning of successor operative guidance here. So.
I mean, maybe Connor and Ryan, we could, amend this to say something like including links or notations. So it could, to the extent the agency wants to do what's at the end of the, CFR sections or the code sections, that could be an option. And then within any successor operative guidance documents as appropriate or something like that, if that would address your concerns, that it might be there's so many successor guidance documents that it wouldn't be appropriate, or perhaps.
I hate to say it, but it is appropriate and feasible, but I don't know what others think.
Again, though, I don't think it's infeasible to consider, and that's all that the
Right.
3 is asking.
Peter.
Harry, did I get that language right on E?
Yes, and I think I would probably just say guidance documents, because that's what we're using throughout.
Catch. Peter Strauss.
No, I should have taken my hand down, sorry.
Additional comments on anything in number 3? I think it helps. A good chunk of this is from 2019-3 as well. Okay, moving on then to number 4.
I'm gonna try to put this on one page.
Yeah, if you
Give me
can
one
press the
second.
margin thing.
Yeah.
So this is about labeling. Also, a good chunk of this, I think, is from 2019-3.
Hurrah for E.
I'm sorry.
Hurrah for E.
Additional comments on, or any comments on number 4 as it reads? Dave Rasker.
Yeah, I just have a concern about the redlining provision in C. Having a consistent redlining policy may make sense for documents that don't have sort of a regular change frequency. But if a document is changed multiple times and the red lines themselves become out of date, and we wouldn't want to be implying that, say, the 3 times ago guidance document should be a red line to the current version, but having a red line only to the subsequent version would be misleading.
You have ideas, Dave, on how to kind of incorporate that point in the language? And I'm looking back at 2019-3 to see if the language tracks, but do you have ideas on how to incorporate that point in the language?
I don't. I think part of the problem is that most of the guidance documents that I've had involvement on, when they are partially rescinded, they are usually entirely restated. That we don't sort of have we may have an amendment process, but and a red line is sort of circulated internally so that the people understand what is being done internally, but usually the whole guidance document is replaced. So a reference to subsequent versions, it certainly makes a lot of sense, but a red line version can be just as static and inoperative as the inoperative guidance document itself. And I don't quite know how to square the circle, but for making the sort of downgrading paragraph C in this red line idea to really allowing the agency to figure out the best way to communicate to the public changes in guidance over time.
Is the clause at 131 to 134, like one or more of the labeling methods, does that help address, it's just sort of one idea?
131, 134. I think the challenge is that for me is it may not make sense to do it consistently. It may make sense on a case by case as the agency decides how to best communicate changes to the public, but it may not always be the best solution, particularly for guidance that changes on a regular basis.
Carrie, go to you first.
I think it's a good point. I wonder, David, if something like this might address your concern, rather than starting C by saying posting a red line version, maybe say something like communicating through an appropriate red line version, comma, list of changes or other similar method, ways in which a guidance document has been partially rescinded, comma, identifying the exact, the specific revisions. Then it makes it clear, first of all, that again, let me back up for a moment and say, as Connor said, this is all to consider adopting one or more of the following, but it also doesn't put the premium perhaps on just redline or always do redlining in the manner that might cause the concern you've raised. But it suggests and gets the agency to think about redlining in an appropriate way as one possible way of communicating specific changes.
I'm just thinking of the practitioner. Sometimes a red line is hardly appropriate for someone who's just trying to understand changes. So maybe if it's communicating changes through an appropriate method, ways in which the guidance document has been modified. And then the red line can be the appropriate method at the time. I just don't, I don't want to imply that the same method will be appropriate across a wide range of guidance documents. It really should be, we just want you to communicate clearly to the public what's changed.
Peter, you're shaking your head.
Well, I'm in total agreement with Carrie and the way in which David has modified his proposal. But I want to point out that we're no longer talking about labeling, which is fine. 4 can start with the agency should label inoperative guidance documents, but then the agency should consider adopting one or more of the following methods for dealing with changes in its guidance documents. And then we've got A, B, C, D, and I like Carrie's formulation of C. I can point out that method will often, perhaps most of the time, be best pursued in connection with the new guidance document that supplants the old one, and not the old document. But I don't think we need to talk to that as long as we just put it in the way Carrie has.
I think it's a good point about this going beyond labeling. Carrie?
Oh yeah, I think that's fine. Todd, we probably just need after the comma of after other similar method to make some revisions there. Communicating changes to a guidance document. that has. No, not there, not there. Oh, well, communicating, yeah, changes to, I guess you could, to a guidance document through an appropriate method. Communicating changes to a guidance document that has been partially rescinded. Using an appropriate method, maybe. Such as a red line version list of changes or other similar method. That identifies specific revisions.
And leave off identifying the specific revisions.
Does that work?
I think you should leave off identify specific
Okay.
revisions.
Okay, that's fine.
Does this also apply to partially superseded documents? Not.
Yes.
Partially rescinded or superseded guidance that have been partially rescinded or superseded.
Ron Glover.
CED.
Well, I was going to suggest flipping it and starting with using, and then moving on to communicating, but it's edited now, so I'm not sure it matters. I want it just to be clear about the sentence structure. But I think I actually would start with using an appropriate method, such as redline version, list of changes or similar method to communicate changes to a guidance document that has been partially rescinded or superseded. Because using should not modify superseded.
I like that.
Thanks. I'll let God catch up. Additional comments, anything on 4? Any part of 4, sorry. Additional comment, Ron? Hearing none, then we'll move on to number 5, which is additional means of notifying the public. I think we discussed this at some length in the last meeting, but I'll open up just number 5, 157 through 161. And hearing none, number 6, any part of number 6. Peter Strauss.
Oh, recognizing that it's repetitive of what is now 4E, because it is a method of notifying the public. I would add an E, including reference and links in replacement guidance.
My only concern here is this is supposed to be other ways beyond the web, I think. And so conceptually, I'm not sure the links and the web references fit here because it's supposed to be other ways.
Okay.
I don't know what others think.
No, that's fine. I accept that.
Additional comments on number 6. Okay, hearing none, then I suggest we spend some time with the preamble. So many thanks to the ACUS team and to Carrie for hard work on the preamble. I don't know if Todd, Reeve, Carrie, Matt, anyone wants to say some opening remarks about the preamble and the framing of prior ACUS work or anything else, but I will open the floor to anyone who was involved in drafting the preamble for any introductory remarks.
I'll just say in drafting this, I think Todd took great pains to consider the committee's discussion last time about making clear the connections between this current recommendation and the 2019-31. So that was a a major consideration in putting this together. And I think you can see the sections where that's clear, including a footnote that attempts to make some specific cross references.
Any other introductory remarks? Sorry to put folks on the spot.
I don't have anything to add beyond that.
Okay.
I don't either. No, I would just sort of echo Carrie that, we tried to be as clear and careful as possible to indicate sort of, how this builds on 2019-3.
Well, let's start then with the first two paragraphs. So what's on the screen, and we'll include footnotes. So lines 1 through 12, comments on lines 1 through 12. Peter Strauss.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I didn't realize you were going to do it paragraph by paragraph. My hand's up for a later paragraph.
Okay. Hearing none, then Todd will go down. Let's just take the next two paragraphs. So what's on there would be, I guess, lines 14 through 27. This is getting into some of the legal requirements. And I think some of this had the benefit of being vetted in recommendation 2019-3. Okay, hearing none, let's do the next two paragraphs. Sorry to chop your document up, Todd, but we'll do. Actually, let's do this page together. So this goes through the OMB Good Guidance Bulletin, which Paul knows quite well, among others, and then the discussion of recommendation 2019-3. So I'll just open up for everything on this page, 31 through 50. Is this yours, Peter?
Yes.
Your comment? Okay, go ahead.
So I think that there should be, in the last of these paragraphs, language specifically invoking the utility of facilitating back and forth.
So you want to emphasize something from 2019-3 on that point?
Yeah, and just reflecting on the importance of facilitating members of the public and the regulated understanding of changes. Facilitating.
Peter, would it address that point to at the very end of that paragraph on line 50, insert a comment?
That's where I would expect it to be.
Do you want it a separate sentence, or could we say at the very end, right before footnote 12, footnote 10, excuse me, to put comma, including by making cross references to
No, I wouldn't put it in that. I mean, my preference would be to explain rather than to specify a means in order to facilitate public understanding of changes.
Okay, well, that could be then. So at the very end, about such document in order to facilitate. I guess I'm wondering, should it be a separate sentence, or are you proposing, or just adding a clarifying?
I'm happy for the Committee on Style to deal with the idea.
Okay.
Any other points on the idea? My sense is it just draw something from 2019-3, which I'm sure we can do.
Yes, and it's in that paragraph.
Got it. Okay, thank you. Todd, if you don't mind just scrolling back up to this whole page. Additional comments, anything on this page, including the language we put on to the next page, anything on this section. Okay, hearing none, let's go to the next two paragraphs. The final two paragraphs, lines 53 through 60.
Actually, on rereading, I have a question, Connor, if I may.
Please, which line, just so we know where to go.
Line 56. Should we insert does not necessarily advise agencies? I mean, I don't want it to be the preamble to read that ACUS is taking any position with respect to whether agencies should try to post all of their inoperative guidance documents or not, just that, and I worry a little bit without necessarily there that it might imply that ACUS is affirmatively recommending against posting all inoperative guidance online.
How about speak to whether agencies should?
There's one, oh, there we go. There we go.
But I don't know, maybe the folks who have other
Should not
ideas.
be should not be understood as.
Yeah.
Maybe that's better. And maybe those who have written a lot of these preambles can look for consistency with prior approaches. I don't know. Peter, did you have an additional point on?
No, that was it.
So Todd, I'm wondering, should not be understood as speaking to, did we want to incorporate Connor's suggestion there?
I think that gets too wordy, so I'm fine.
Advising is fine.
I think otherwise it gets too many. I
right.
forget the English language term, but other comments on 53 through 60. Okay. Hearing that, I would just, some risk, just open the floor for any concluding comments from anybody on where we're going for the next meeting, additional thoughts, since we have a little time. Peter Strauss.
Well, just because it was called for earlier, if it's relevant, I sent around to everyone suggestions for the wording of a new 2 to facilitate public understanding of guidance development and changes. Agencies should include links in new guidance documents to all now inoperative guidance that they affect. And in making that now inoperative guidance available should also include links to any guidance that in whole or in part supplants it.
I'm sorry, Peter, did you send that an email or the chat
It was in the
function?
chat.
I sent it as a chat to everyone.
Oh, okay. Not sure I have that, but okay, as long as we have that, Todd, we can.
I have that captured, yes.
Okay. I may have done something in mine. Any other closing comments from anybody? Matt, Reeve, Todd, any things we need additional clarification on? Any thoughts about the project between now and the next meeting?
I
don't
myself. I think this was done exceptionally well. Thank you.
I don't either. Yeah, I would echo Matt.
So the next meeting, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, bud.
Go ahead, Connor. I was just going to say the next meeting is November 9th. So, so just 6 days from now.
As always, please send us any recommended language. Does anyone from ACUS want to put a quick plug in for the 1 p.m. forum? ACUS is having a 1 p.m. forum on access of underserved communities to the regulatory process. So hopefully some join for that.
Reeve?
Sure. Yeah, no. So we have the first installment of a multi-part series on underrepresented communities in the regulatory process. It'll be starting at 1 p.m. I do believe there's a link available on the website. So if you're interested, we encourage you to join us both for this first installment and for subsequent installments, all of which are also listed on the ACUS webpage or website.
To which I'd only add that today's forum will feature, among others, one of the deputy White House counsels, and also a senior counsel at OIRA.
Well, terrific. Well, thank you, everybody, for all the thoughts. We will work on
Connor?
the next draft. Peter, if you have a closing comment,
I do. Well,
recognize you.
because
Just-
I have a conflict next Tuesday and won't be able to be here. So I just wanted to say that I really thoroughly approve and would support what's emerged from our discussions today.
Thank you. Well, I look forward to the next meeting. Please send us thoughts, and hopefully at the next meeting, we will take a vote on the recommendation. All right, thank you, and see you next week.
Thank you, Connor.
Thank you.